Hello and welcome back to the Python logging course. This is lesson 2 where you will learn about log levels. I'm your host Mike Driscoll. Today we're going to learn about the available log levels in the Python logging module and how they are used. You'll also learn how to use the different log levels, and we'll look at logging exceptions because while exceptions are not a log level, there's a special way to log them with Python. Let's check it out. So first, let's just talk a little bit about what they are. Logging levels will allow you to control which messages you record in your logs. As we discussed last time, the different levels increase or decrease the verbosity of your logs. So if you start at the informational level, you'll exclude any levels that are below that, and anything that is above that will be included. And that's just how it works. So the higher in the log levels you go, the less verbose your logs will be. Whereas the lower you go, the more logs will show up in your file. So let's just talk about those log levels. What are they and how many are there? Python's logging module supports 6 logging levels all by itself. Let's see what they're called. We have not set, which you almost never see used. It's logging level 0. So what that means is that you can also set a logging level by using a number. So these are reserved numbers, 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. And what that means is that you can technically create your own custom logging level if you wanted to. But if you do, you should try to avoid using any of the numbers that are already reserved because you'll get funny logic problems and you'll wonder why your logs aren't working the way you expect them to. So just choose a different number. But not set is usually not used. But what it does is it indicates that ancestor loggers should be consulted for the log level or that all events are logged, which is the default setting. So you don't normally set it to not set. It's just the default because it'll log everything. But more often than not, you'll want info. Anyway, debug is the next level, and the next lowest level, it's level 10. It gives you detailed information that would be of interest to the developer for diagnostic purposes. So in this case, this would be where you'd put all of your extra log messages as a software engineer. You want really detailed logs of what's going on, but most of the time you don't want that shipped to the customer. So you would put those in like a logging.debug statement, and those logs would only appear if you changed the logging level to a lower log level. So here, if I set it to info, you wouldn't get the debug level at all until I reset the log level down to debug. So this is where all the secret sauce goes for you software developers and engineers out there. If you want to put stuff in the logs you don't want the customer to see necessarily, but it is very helpful for you to figure out what's wrong with your code, I would recommend putting it in the debug level and just rerunning it. Now, of course, you don't always know when a bug will happen, so make sure to record errors and such at a much higher level, like error or critical, so that those will get logged even at the informational level, because anything at informational and above gets logged. If you only put those errors and stuff in the debug log, you're not going to have those to look back on. So informational level, or number 20, just confirms that your application is working as expected. These will just be like status reports, like application started, function ran successfully, for example, you downloaded a file correctly. Stuff like that would probably be informational messages, whereas debug might give you more granular information, like maybe you want it to record how long something took. Maybe it needs to record the IP address or something. It needs more granular detail than what you want in informational. Warning, or level 30, indicates that something unexpected happened or a problem may occur soon, like low disk space. So for warning levels, like I said, you could tell it to record whatever the disk space is and warn at a certain level. You could say you're running out of RAM, or you might notice that the internet connection is getting slow, or the database connection. You can't connect to the database. The queries are taking too long. Stuff like that could be warnings. Or if there's a certain level where the query is way too long, you might want to throw an error. And if you do that, you put it in the error part of the log, which is level 40. And for level 40, when you have an error, the serious issue has occurred, but the software is not able to function correctly, but it didn't crash. So errors are stuff that you can recover from, and your application will still work, but you're not going to get like a 404 like on a web page where your server goes down. You can still, you can still process stuff to some degree. However, critical, which is the highest level, or level 50, this error, when this occurs, you're going to want to record it because your application is probably crashing at this point. So if you can, you put that in the critical one. You might be saying database is completely incommunicado, which means you can't talk to it at all. And, your app is just screwed up now. You can't use it. Or maybe it can't connect to the servers and back up your information. And that's a critical error because now your data isn't getting backed up. It all depends on, what you decide is critical versus error versus warning. And as you figure that out with your application, you can set those different log levels appropriately. Okay, so let's talk about using log levels. When you're using a log level, we're going to look at this code. This is basically what we saw in our previous lesson. We're going to create our basic config. We're going to log it out to something called loglevels.log. It's going to be at the debug level. And since debug is the lowest one besides not set, all of these messages should get logged. So if we run this and we hop on over here and look at our loglevels.log, we can see we have debug info, warning, etc. in there. Now, let's go ahead and delete this quick. We'll just delete that. And then we're going to go back over here and we're going to change this to another level. Let's say we make this a warning level. Okay, we'll save that. Let's rerun it. And we'll go back over here to log levels, which hopefully will show up again. Sometimes logs don't work right with Jupyter, and I have to play games with it. Okay, so it's gonna be naughty. So let's close out of that, and what we will do is restart. So sometimes Jupyter Notebook does goofy things when you want to do things like this, and that's totally fine. But let's try running that one more time. There we go. So now we have log levels. And you can see now we have warning, error, and critical are the only ones that are in our log now, because warning and higher are the ones that get set, and info and debug get excluded. So you can just kind of play around with that, change the log level, and just rerun the code repeatedly and see how that changes the output. Let's also talk about logging exceptions. So when you're logging an error or critical log, it's not always the same as logging an exception is. And what I mean by that is a Python exception is different, and so they're treated just a little bit differently. So we're going to use a slightly different logging format here. We're going to import logging, and we're going to talk about this more in our next lesson. But this time we're just going to get a logger. You can put whatever name you want to put in here. In this case, we're going to say acceptor. We're going to set our log level to info. This is just a different way of writing it, different way of configuring your logging. Then we're going to create a function called divide, and we're going to pass in two parameters, and we're going to grab the result of dividing those two, a divided by b. If there's a zero division error, we're going to log it, and you'll see here that we're doing logging or logger.exception. That's why I created the logger object, because when you want to log an exception, you'll do logger.exception because it will do all the magic for you, and whereas the other ones don't necessarily work the way you would expect them to. And so what this is going to do is it's going to take the exception and put the full trace back into my log. If we get a type error, it'll log that one out. Otherwise, it'll just return the result. We're going to try dividing 1 by 0. So let's just go ahead and try running this. And when you run it, it's going to log out to standard out. It's going to say an error has occurred, and it's going to give you the trace back. Now, because I'm running this in Jupyter Notebook, you get some gobbledygook here. But if you'd run this directly in your console or your terminal, you'd get the direct path to the file that you're running it in, like log, it would say, C: users or temp / log exception.py here in line 10, and then it'll just put all this in there. And so you get all this nicety just wrapped up in your log, and it'll tell you exactly what's wrong with your code. somebody passed in an invalid divisor, so to speak. Or, if I was silly and I put in like a string here, you can't divide by a string, so you'll get a type error, and it'll say incompatible types. I'll leave that for you to try out, though, because rerunning stuff in Jupyter can be kind of painful. So anyway, logging exceptions will allow you to troubleshoot your application and determine, what went wrong. It's also a great tool for detecting bad user input. So that's what I would use it for. It's just really handy to be able to have that trace back in your code as well, because it points directly to where the problem is. So let's review. Today you learned about the different available log levels in Python, how to use those log levels to control the verbosity of your code, and then you got to learn how to log an exception with Python's logging module. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.